pyramid has four corners. There's four corners in the geometry, and we shoot through them as we orbit through the galaxy. Now, they don't understand why this happened, but when you look to the dinosaur, the major extinction 62 million years ago, look at this. They cannot reconcile why it is that before this alleged asteroid came in, which is not an asteroid, why there was sudden massive climate change on Earth prior to the sudden extinction of the dinosaurs. Answer: because as the physics of the flow of time changes, you get upgrades in DNA. The flow of time changes, DNA changes, and then they call it an asteroid. But that's why you see climate change before. Well, hence we're getting climate change now, and I'm going to prove to you in just a little while here that our DNA is changing. I have solid, scientific, irrefutable evidence that DNA is changing. This is now starting to be associated with huge space clouds of charged particles and energy. That could be what's responsible for these mass extinction events, which they can't call it speciation. They always have to focus on the negative, the extinction. But they're starting to say now that it could be related to charged particles in the galaxy that are doing something to the Earth. Now, again, I showed you crop circles at the beginning of this talk. A lot of you didn't expect we were going to start directly on time, if not maybe a minute or two early. So I will refer back to some of the things I was saying before. And I'm going to show you the history now of crop circles, because there were a lot of crop circle prophecies I gave. Most of you were here at the beginning, talking about the change in consciousness that's going on right now surrounding 2012, and that it's going to be associated with a downfall of corrupt elements in the government. You saw the pentagram, the pentagram in the Pentagon, which also had the Nazi swastika. You also saw multiple redundant symbolism of the NRO, the owl, the NRO being the National Reconnaissance Organization, the hub of all the UFO cover-up behind the scenes. The NRO clearly being prophetically described as being defeated by multiple symbols showing the dove of peace coming in, comets coming in, and the disclosure of extraterrestrial realities. So, crop circles go all the way back 1,200 years to 815 AD. And this is one of the last times I'm going to be able to do this publicly without having already spoiled it, because 2012 Event Horizon, my new video, is coming out probably tomorrow, maybe Monday, depends on what we have to do. And that's going to be actually talking about all this stuff. So you're going to see it again on the internet in just a little while, but I want to use this because it's very important. 815 AD is the first written record by the Archbishop of Lyon. Here he is in his lovely, dreamy quarters. Brightly lit, as you can see. It's a freaking dungeon. And here he is issuing his edict, which is called Against the Foolish Opinion of the Masses About Hail and Thunder. It's no different than swamp gas. It's the same old idea. People believed that cloud ships from Magonia were coming and creating crop circles to pay them for keeping the weather good. So the beings basically, there was an abduction. The people that were abducted were taken on board a ship of some kind that was called a cloud ship. Beings from Magonia spoke to them. That's where they said they were from. And these beings told the people that were abducted that there was going to be all these changes happening. It's all in Jacques Vallée's book, Passport to Magonia, classic in the UFO field. Crop circles were one of the things that these beings discussed. So many of the locals were taking crops out of crop circles to get the energy high off of them for fertility rituals, which is literally where you peel down to being naked and have sex in the middle of these crops. They were getting a real kick out of this, and so Agabard, because church and state were fused and you now had the government as the church, Agabard had to formally prevent people from robbing crops out of crop circles because they were so popular back in the day. It's not even disputed, so we have a clear record of crop circles. Notice Agabard did not say that crop circles didn't exist. He knew they existed, and he had to create a government mandate to stop people from taking crops out of them. And the people said that the crops were made by people from Magonia. Very interesting. In the 12th century, you have a legend of fairy rings, a ring of daisies caused by elves dancing, another reference to crop circles. So I'm showing you now, this did not go away. This is a public domain image from Wikipedia in 1880 describing the ancient legend of little gnomes and fairies and elves dancing in a circle, causing a crop circle. This from 1678 was where a farmer had a crop circle appear in his yard overnight and equated it with the devil being responsible for causing it. He had a mower who came to mow down his crops. It was harvest time in the end of August, And the farmer got very pissed off, probably dropped a lot of F-bombs, or the equivalent in the 1600s thereof. I'd rather have the effing devil mow my effing crops than you effing F. Something like that. I don't want to drop too many F-bombs on stage. It kind of diminishes my credibility. But that's what was going on here. Get the F off my land. Right? So, that night, the whole field lit up as if it was all on fire. Guy wakes up in the middle of the night, sees all this light. And a perfect circle appears in the crops the next morning, so neatly mowed that no mortal man could have done it. That's the front page news in Hertfordshire for that day in August of 1678. And, of course, it could only be caused by the devil. So here he is doing his little job, making a perfectly neat double circle pattern. Then we have Dr. Robert Plant, and if you've seen my talks before, I call him, not only does he look like Robert Plant, the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, which is pretty cool, he also appears to be, he was in the founding days of the Renaissance, the beginning of the scientific revolution, and he found the hip bone of a megalosaurus, which was one of the original paleontological discoveries of dinosaurs. But back then they didn't know about dinosaurs, so he thought that it had to be something else. So this is why I call him the world's first homoerotic paleontologist. And of course, this would be quite a gigantic boner. Yes, indeed. Now, I could go on and on with that, but let's not get too far into trouble here. So what Dr. Robert Plant was doing, among other things, is diagramming crop circles that were appearing around the land in England. So here you have the spiral, you have something that looks like an ear, suggesting that you listen. And then here at the bottom you have a circle with a square inside of it, which is clearly and obviously the result of a square piece of wind, as you can see clearly diagrammed here. A square piece of wind blows on the ground and creates a perfect square in the crops. It's the only scientific explanation. Very logical. Just like the gigantic scrotum, rock scrotum. I mean, that's an incredible achievement. If you were a giant and your scrotum actually made it through fossilization, it's very impressive. Now, the soil under these crop circles was much looser and drier than ordinary, the parts interspersed with a white whore. You notice the eroticism keeps coming out here. He definitely has some interesting stuff going on here. But anyway, we won't even go there. It was much like moldy bread with a musty, rancid smell, but when he put it in his mouth and tasted it, it was insipid, which means it didn't taste bad. So you got to give this guy credit. If you're going to go out there and dig up a scrotum out of the ground, gigantic scrotum, and then you're going to take soil and put it in your mouth that smells like moldy socks, this guy's really dedicated to the craft. He's very impressive. So now I want you to pay attention to that, because what happens is water is sucked out of the soil. It desiccates, meaning it dries out the soil, making it white and brittle. There's a funny smell, but it doesn't taste bad because there hasn't been any time for putrefaction. There's no water for anything to putrefy from. And then it's actually being documented in the 1990s by Dr. Gil Levengood extensively. Dry, brittle, crumbling soil under crop circles. This is a gulf now that spans 400 years. Nobody is suggesting that the circles that Dr. Robert Plant was seeing 400 years ago were caused by some pranksters out there who wanted to make them. Nobody even knew about it. Nor would these same pranksters have been around 1,200 years ago to piss off Agabard to the point that he had to issue a government edict preventing the creation of crop circles. 1880, we have Nature magazine, in which there was a documentation of circular spots in a field of wheat. And here's the volume, July 1880. That's also in my video, so if you want to look that up, you can. Late 1940s, somebody actually saw a whirlwind touch the ground and form a circle, suggesting it possibly could be caused by wind, but it only took a couple of seconds for the circle to be formed. Then, in 1972 in Warminster, Bryce Bond saw a crop circle form after hearing a weird high-pitched humming noise. Something pushed down the wheat, but the air was completely still. No wind. This man is standing there, and he sees a great imprint take shape without wind where the wheat is forced down in a clockwise circle. He's hearing a high-pitched humming, and the circle just opens up like an oriental fan. Can you imagine how impressive that would have been? Can you imagine, just try to imagine, standing in a field, and we've actually heard from Dr. Stephen Greer what this thing sounds like. It's like that. You get this very high, it's almost like crickets. And you see this flash of light, and then you watch this circle just, oh my God, all the crops just, and it's done just like that. Can you imagine how cool that would have been? Well, this is what's going on. This is not the result of a bunch of drunk guys named Doug and Dave. Hey, let's make a crop circle, right? Which is the conventional debunking explanation. Not true. So beginning in the late 70s, we saw single circles, just like the one in the middle. Then it began to be circles with a cross around them, as you see here with the 4 points of the compass. There's also a little circle on the bottom left, which they called grape shot back in the day. They weren't very impressive. You could easily explain it as maybe wind or something, a bunch of kids or two drunk guys or whatever. But then we started to see symbolism appear. This is the goddess symbolism, the pregnant stomach of the mother goddess, a pagan symbol you see on the left, clearly showing up in crop formations on the right here. Then they came back a couple of years ago and actually gave you the goddess in very clear, unambiguous terms, just to make sure you really got the point. Because this is talking about the pregnancy of Mother Earth, the same prophecies that were written into the ancient myths talking about the birth of a golden age and the coming of the new cycle, 25,000-year cycle, which is the end of the Mayan calendar. This one came out in 1990. You have a series of pregnant mother goddess images here. The smaller circle, the larger circle, connected by a bar. Showed up on a Led Zeppelin box set, CDs that I got at the winter of 1990, which I was very happy to get. Then in 1991, we had 3 goddess symbols. Notice the 3 corners. Notice that there's larger circles in the middle, so those 3 different goddesses put together with their pregnant stomach in the middle. But you have first dimension on the top left, second dimension on the top right. The first dimension represented by the point in the circle, which is the void. Second dimension is where the point starts flowing out in 2 dimensions, creating those spiraling lines. Then on the bottom, you have the third dimension where it becomes ratcheting, and that actually is a spiral you could draw around a pyramid